Well, welcome everyone to this Around the World in Medical Technology session for Genesis Conference 2020. For all of us, 2020 has been different by any stretch of the imagination. But one of the opportunities that have arisen for us as a membership group as One Nucleus, as when we've put events together, has been able to link in around the world through various collaborators and networks, just to get different perspectives on often the same challenges and the same topics, but people see them from very different background and to get the audience understanding what that dynamic is like around the world. We've been lucky enough to have delegates like the group in front of you at the moment, who will be introduced shortly, which Greer Deal, one of our long-standing members and supporters, and who is a founder of Global Regulatory Services, actually operates around the world. So why wouldn't we have Greer chairing a session for us? So on that note, I'm going to hand over to Greer, and I'll look forward to hearing the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tony, and thank you for this opportunity to have this panel discussion as part of the Genesis conference. And actually, it's a wonderful excuse to be able to have a chat with my colleagues from all around the world on the subject, which is a hot subject to do with all things medtech. So a brief introduction to myself. So yes, as Tony said, I'm Greer Deal, and I'm Director of Global Regulatory Services. It was founded 13 years ago, and the business model is that we have a network of independent specialists all around the world, providing in-country expertise as well as the regulatory and scientific technical know-how. And the people before you today in the panel are representative of some of our network. We do cover the whole of the life sciences, so anything from agri-tech, foods, cosmetics, obviously medtech, pharmaceuticals, stem cells, and regenerative medicine. And our focus is regulatory affairs and quality compliance. But we're pretty well connected. So if you have a weird and wonderful question, I'm sure that if you want to ask anyone at Global Regulatory Services, we can find someone who can give you the answer that you're seeking. So on that note, I will introduce my colleagues. First, I'm going to introduce Ireland, just quickly before Kieran comes online. Kieran represents MDD, which is a spin out from Global Regulatory Services. And the reason for that is because we've had such demand for medtech services. So we wanted to be able to have a company that purely focused on supporting you, the medtech sector, and also to have a presence in Europe as well as the UK because of Brexit. I have to mention it. We'll cover more of that later. So Kieran, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Greer, and also thanks to Tony and One Nucleus for the opportunity to be here. My name is Kieran Connole, and as Greer said, I'm a regulatory and quality compliance consultant at MDD. I'm based here in, usually rainy but nice, dry but cold Galway in Ireland, and MDD supports a lot of companies coming into Europe with medtech, particularly MDR and IVDR issues. So thanks, Greer and Tony.
Okay, so we're going to move over to Canada, and Paul, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Yes, I'm Paul Larocque. I'm based in Canada. I used to work at Health Canada as the head of the Chemistry and Manufacturing Review Department. And I was also chairman of the GMP committee that wrote the sterile products GMPs, which you know as Annex 1. So for that reason, we do a lot of compliance work on sterile products and biologicals all over the world, sterile pharmaceuticals, and sterile medical devices as well. And I'm a sole practitioner of my company is called ACERNA Incorporated. And but we do operate around, I have 30, not unlike Greer, I have a network of 30 people, and we'll pull teams together according to what the client's needs are.
Perfect, thank you very much, Paul. So over in Brazil, Marcelo.
Hi, thank you, Greer, and thank you, Tony. I'm Marcelo. I work with SQR Consultant. We are a consultant practice with 10 years, but I work with medical device regulatory affairs for almost 20 years right now. And we work with regulatory affairs in general, particularly obviously Brazilian regulatory affairs, a lot of CE mark, and even the US and other countries also. I also work a lot with standards. I am particularly in the internet, by working with standards and other types of documentation, representing Brazil as an expat member in ISO and IC in several different groups. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Marcelo. And Dallas in the US. You're on mute, Dallas.
Sorry about that. Okay. Yes, so I'm Dallas Thomas. I have about 15 years experience in the medical device industry. 5 of those years doing consulting, focusing on primarily 510Ks during the COVID-19 pandemic, emergency use authorizations as well for a variety of products, masks, PPE, gowns, etc. And have worked in a variety of different projects and for a lot of different companies and different product types, and happy to be here.
Great, thank you very much. So after these introductions, I'm just going to set the scene a bit for everybody so that people who are watching this session can understand what we're going to cover. So it is, as Tony has said, it's medtech around the world, and the panelists here today represent some of the key markets, and what I'm aiming to have is to have a professional chat about how regulations may differ, may be similar, and also touching on some specific subjects such as COVID, changing regulations. As we know, there's a lot of changes in Europe, but how is that impacting rest of world? And also, what I'd like to do is touch on auditing, and that's a lot of that is coming out of what's happening with COVID. So I'll kick off with, because Dallas was mentioning about COVID and emergency use. And Dallas, if you could just talk through some of your experience with the fast tracking of devices because of COVID, that would be great.
Yeah, so with the emergency use authorization, it's been a mechanism FDA has had around for quite a while, but has not ever been used to this level, obviously with the COVID-19. Pros and cons with an EUA, as we call it, an emergency use authorization versus a 510K for most of the products requiring a 510K pre-market clearance to the FDA. The EUA, essentially FDA says that they will review it in as timely manner as possible, but there is no mandated deadline for which they have to respond to those emergency use authorizations. At one point, I had received word from colleagues at the FDA that they were receiving between 30 and 40 EUA requests per hour.
Wow.
Across, masks, gowns, other PPE, ventilators, and so that's a lot. And also, there's no cost to do an emergency use authorization with the agency, so there's no user fee, and so the barrier to get in the door for EUAs with the FDA is a lot lower than it would be for a 510K. First off, no fee. Secondly, there's lesser testing requirements for those, and they've kind of turned on and shut off certain emergency use authorizations. So remember, it's by product type, so it's on a case-by-case basis. Some of them have been shut off. For example, there were some related to Chinese manufacturing, and basically with those for Chinese manufacturers, they basically at one point turned it off so that they did not allow emergency use authorization for Chinese manufacturers any longer. And therefore, that has been removed partly because they felt that the supply had been, the demand had been met with the supply, and others they've turned off and on over time. But one recent development is that in some cases, it may be that a 510K actually gets through quicker than an EUA because there is such a volume of submissions right now. So for example, I have one client, we have an EUA for a mask that's been in there since October, has not gone through yet. And if you look specifically at the surgical mask emergency use authorization letter, it was released on August 5th. And the last I checked, I believe as of last Friday, there were only about 12 surgical masks that had been authorized through the EUA. And so I'm having some clients now that are saying, you know what, it's getting close to a 510K. timeline. Therefore, maybe we just go straight to 510K rather than waiting for the EUA to occur. So I think there's a lot of demand, and I'm not sure how much resources, are dedicated at the agency to that, or if truly there are that many, non-compliant submissions being submitted, and that's why there's only 12 that are actually authorized through that.
So in your experience, how long was it taking to get an EU authorization, emergency use authorization?
Yeah, so early on it was a lot quicker, a month to 6 weeks, but now, like I say, this one that went in October, we haven't even got confirmation that it has started substantive review yet. We received confirmation that they had received it and they issue a tracking number, but not that it's actually been started to be reviewed. So if that's, any gauge on it, at least 2 months, possibly up to the 3 months. At that point, you're already getting into 510K territory if you would have submitted the 510K to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, the advantage of the 510K is they are mandated by Congress here in the US to supply a response to the questions within the 90 days after they start the substantive review. So, plus the companies that are serious about it, they're going to pay the fee and get in the line for the 510K anyway. Mm-hmm. So just some disadvantages, I think, in the EUA right now that the 510K may not have. So
is the EUA a temporary authorization?
Yes.
Okay, so if someone wants to keep their product on the market, they're going to have to go through the full process. Yeah.
They'll still have to do the 510K. So a lot of manufacturers will do the EUA first, or that was the idea. And then while that's on the market, because there's a lower testing threshold, submit the 510K shortly thereafter or in parallel. And, but ultimately getting the 510K, that way, when the FDA decides to turn off the emergency use authorizations, you're not going to be in a position where you could potentially lose the ability to sell on the market after the pandemic is declared over by Department of Health and Human Services here in the United States.
Okay, well, thank you, Dallas. So Paul, can I ask you how that compares to what is happening in Canada?
It's very similar to what Dallas described. They're trying to not, they're trying to be harmonized here. I've had different experiences with like Dallas, with different amounts of time. I had one, we call them, you call them emergency use authorizations. We call them interim order authorizations. I've had one as quickly as in 12 hours, getting one approval for one client. Yeah, I sent it in about 4 p.m. one afternoon, and I got the approval the next morning.
Gosh.
So yeah, so that was the quickest I've ever got. But that was for a class 1 medical device, so for a mask. For the class 2 gloves and things like that, those have come as quickly as 2 weeks. And some of them, I think they disappear somewhere and you never hear from them again. It's been months and months. So we've actually started resubmitting because we think they've lost a few of them. So, but we don't know what happened. So anyway, we also did a class 3. That was probably the biggest project, which was a ventilator.
Gosh.
We submitted that in June, and we got the approval a couple of weeks ago. Now they had promised a 1-week turnaround from when we submitted initially, because ventilators were a big deal and we were worried. But it turns out we don't need as many ventilators as we thought we were going to need. The whole world, I think, doesn't have a shortage of ventilators anymore.
Yeah.
So for that reason, I think they've deprioritized that, and it took them, like, from when they started the review, it took them a good 8 weeks with all the back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'm seeing sort of a similar story to the American story, and we've tried to keep our regulations, as best I can tell, harmonized with Europe and the US.
Okay, and is it a similar situation with regards to that? It is temporary, so when the pandemic is declared as over, then people do need a full.
Right, but we didn't one thing they did a little bit differently than just turning off China. What they did is they ended up with different lists. So they have a black list, and there's a whole bunch of Chinese and Indian suppliers on that list. And so you may not buy or import or distribute anything by them. And then there's what we call there's actually two gray lists. These are temporary authorizations, and they may be from Chinese suppliers or other suppliers. We've had a bunch from Vietnam. And they go onto the gray list, and that gray list will be turned off at the end of the pandemic.
Okay.
If you want to, if you're serious, the serious people, clients, they want to be on the white list. And the white list is the permanent list that has been, it's been the list of approved medical devices since a decade. And it'll continue to be after the pandemic.
Okay, great. So are you finding, Dallas, Paul, are you finding though that companies are using that emergency use authorization or fast track authorization and actually entering both markets at the same time? Or
Yes.
is it, yeah.
I've got one client, my biggest medical device client right now is a plumbing company. They make plumbing supplies, and they thought, gee, we can. So they've been moving and importing all these gloves and masks and infrared thermometers, and so I've probably got 20 some odd medical devices approved for them, all on the gray list.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So, Marcelo, what's the situation with emergency use applications or fast track? What's the mechanism in Brazil?
It's similar, however, we didn't have, as the US and Canada had, we didn't have in the regulation an option for that. We have for years something called a humanitarian device exemption or something like that, the name, right? But it's only for medicine, not for medical devices. What Anvisa ended up doing was they create several, and I mean several, a lot of emergency regulations that basically downplay some of the requirements of the current regulations. And they say, oh, you should do that for the current regulation, but for the emergency, don't do that. So let's say there are 10 requirements for the current regulations, but there are 5 requirements for the emergency. And they just set a lot of different regulations related to registration, to buying from abroad and things like that, because a lot of people also began to buy from abroad and they wanted to do that. There was also a specific regulation for certain types of ventilators, because a lot of people were just wanting to have a lot of ventilators here. We as a company have been working with 3 or 4, 5 in fact, different ventilation manufacturers to get approval. And well, some of them did and some of them didn't yet, because really, although the process can be quick for ventilators, they still have to comply with several things. And most of those were just products that came out from nowhere or for a faculty or something like that, and didn't have enough information to comply with the regulations. In fact, for most of our workers to have in that, helping them redesign or design better their devices, in fact. For class 1 devices, in fact, 1 and 2, since 2 months ago, class 1 and 2 in Brazil, we have a notification system in which the manufacturer simply notifies Anvisa that they want to put in the market, and Anvisa gives them a number. This, in principle, is automatic, but well, they have to give a number, so it takes for more or less 5 days, let's say. Mm-hmm. But that's how things are working here. So for class 1 and 2 devices, things are somewhat quick, very quick. Although Anvisa has been reviewing on this emergency use, because a lot of people, a lot of enterprises that are not medical device manufacturers wanted to register, so they have to go to the emergency use, and then it takes a little more time. But generally, for the established companies, it's a lot easier, because they simply can go through the emergency route, and usually they are already in compliance with most of the things. And if they are not, then the emergency regulations give those just justifications on why certain tasks were not performed, and then if Anvisa agrees with that, they just give you the go.
Okay, thank you, Marcelo. So Kieran, what's happening in Europe and the UK?
Thanks, Greer. I suppose really it's a lot more fractured than the other countries. FDA, Health Canada, they're overseeing the entire country, whereas in Europe, a lot more fractured. You've had, particularly for COVID tests, different countries, while you operate under the in vitro diagnostic directive, you actually have different countries put in separate specifications. The most famous one really is the MHRA. They've set up their own specifications. There's a number of revisions of those specifications and exactly what they're looking for in each COVID test. In terms of transparency, though, around the number of approvals in that, because COVID tests could self-certify, there's no real an overwatch position you can take on that and look through Europe at the moment. You can look up the FDA databases. They're a fantastic tool, but we won't have them in Europe, particularly for diagnostics, until after 2022. And medical device regulation is coming in, so that's something we're sorely missing here. In terms of MDD and TRS, number of companies approach us about self-testing. The self-testing regulation, the self-testing requirements it's a higher bar, compared to you need to notify body approval and need to notify body review of the products, and that's a delayed timeline. Now, the notified bodies were prioritizing a number of these products, especially in the early days, and then trying to balance that out with MDR and IVDR commitments as well. So it did put a bit of a strain on the system. I think as well the interesting part was as well about the self-testing. Belgium completely outlawed it. That you couldn't go to the Belgians and say, yeah, we want to place a self-testing product on the market. No, they won't allow that. I haven't checked it up, but I believe it ended last week or the week before. Need to follow up on that one. But that's in terms of COVID testing. Again, anyone could import it and self-declare under the in vitro diagnostics directive that this met all the requirements. It conformed to the directive. Again, the in vitro diagnostic regulation won't be until May 2022. But again, you could import, there was a case that's well documented at this stage where one company did import, unfortunately, again, Chinese manufactured devices. The devices, were defective and, they weren't performing as well as they should have been. As stated on the label, there were a number of countries, Netherlands, Spain, Ireland, UK, but that has been one of the issues. And I think, for some folks, particularly I think the European Commission, the IVDR can't come in soon enough. In terms of medical devices, I think the biggest thing really has been, the pushback of medical device regulation transition date from May 2020 into May 21. So I think that's been a big thing and something that was completely unforeseen in Europe, because the Commission, I think only 2 weeks before they announced it, had said, no, we're not going to push back MDR. That's given breathing space to a lot of companies, and hopefully a lot of companies use that time to bring everything up to code. In terms of masks, gloves and all that, the requirements aren't as high as other countries. But again, I think the fundamental thing the Europeans are missing is that centralized database to see what is actually occurring and who's getting knocked back. I think that is something that is going to be a huge benefit going forward once the regulations come into force.
Thanks, Kieran. I mean, we do have to talk about China and COVID. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I've been flooded with emails from Chinese companies trying to sell PPE and devices, etc. And in terms of actually purchasing it for the UK market, or actually helping them to go through the regulations to be compliant. And when I start going through the UK requirements, they usually just run for the hills, to be honest, because they think they can just sell it. And literally, we've had someone ring us up, and they had 6 lorry loads of PPE sitting on a tarp in the airport on the tarmac, and it had come into the UK, but it didn't meet any of the requirements, and they expected us just to sort of wave a magic wand and say, there you go, you can come in, you comply, don't worry, and that wasn't the case at all. What is interesting with China is that I don't know if they've restarted, but my Chinese colleagues, I was asking them about emergency use applications and being able to fast track through the regulatory requirements, and they said there is no option to do that now because the Chinese government has declared that the pandemic is over. So they're back to their standard processes for complying with their regulations. So though she did say if there's a major spike, second wave, etc. with COVID, then the government may restart. So I haven't checked my facts recently. It may have restarted, but that's something that I think companies need to be aware of, that these fast track options can literally stop overnight. And then where are you? You actually need to plan to be able to say, okay, so this is our plan for, getting our products out there for the benefit of being a solution for COVID, but understand that at some point that fast track option is going to disappear. And what are you going to do at that point? Do you, as a company, want your product to stay on that market long term? In which case, in the interim, you should really be working towards getting that full compliance. And then it sort of leads on to, we've got the key markets represented by you here today. And what would be interesting is to understand, if, for example, I'm a UK manufacturer and developing this innovative medical device. And I'm thinking, oh, should I go to the US first? Should I do Europe? So if I was going to go to the US first and I'm a UK manufacturer, are there, by doing that, are there benefits to go to the US, which then opens doors to other markets? Dallas, can I address that to you?
Yes. So yeah, there are some geographies that do look at FDA as not necessarily a fast track, but they offer some additional options. So for example, Mexico, I know, is one where they have an equivalence pathway that if you have a 510K in the US and a few other requirements, that you can go through a quicker process. There's other criteria that sometimes the manufacturers don't have, and so they don't always make that faster pathway to market. But just also dovetailing off of your comment about MDD to MDR versus the US, and my experience always was that sometimes manufacturers were doing CE mark first under MDD because it was a quicker, faster pathway to market than even the FDA 510K, for example, pathway. And so I think now it's inverted, and now it's harder under MDR, at least, to go. It takes longer, a lot more skin in the game, a lot more regulatory compliance, quality compliance that didn't exist previously, and all the additional infrastructure and the all the different operators that are involved in the MDR process. And so now I'm seeing more of a trend, and I think it's only going to get more so where the FDA 510K is going to be a lot quicker than the MDR. Because we're talking in some cases, some work with, in my experience with MDR at least, we're talking once you get it all built and submitted, it could take, 9 months to a year and a half to get through that process, depending on how backlogged they are. The notified bodies are also scrambling to learn this, just like industry is as well. So I just think that there's going to be more push to do FDA first, which unfortunate for the European markets, because some of these more innovative technologies or companies that don't have the resources to get a product through that entire gamut of notified body, and even then, which notified body you go with, they're also going to have some variability and variation in the interpretation. It's not unified. So anyway, that was just my thoughts.
Okay, can I bring Kieran into this, because we do have a few discussions about Europe versus the US with our clients.
It's something that's always a hot topic, and front and center really is the US versus EU first question. And same as Dallas, I think MDD, a lot of companies would have just gone Europe first. I think it was 2 years. A lot of products were approved 2 years in Europe before they were in the US for a long time. I think that's going to flip right around. between the new requirements and actually interpreting the new requirements for each company and each product. I think more companies are spending far more money and a large percentage of their income trying to just bring their older products up to code. And like there might be anything wrong with the products. It's just say there's new standards, new technical documentation requirements, and the fact that everything has to go through a notified body. There's no grandfathering. Everything has to be reviewed by a notified body. I think the notified bodies themselves, they're doing as good a job as they can. They want to approve products, but again, they don't have full resources. And again, if you think back to December last year, in Europe, we were promised 20 notified bodies by December 2019. I think we're over 20 now if you include the IVDR ones with that. But again, you have to factor in BSI is there twice, and this BSI UK won't be there for much longer. Brexit or deal or no deal, I believe. But again, and they've moved on to BSI Netherlands. A lot of folks then as well. I think the biggest thing is clinical evidence. I think that was something. And it's something we see with a lot of, startup companies and, particularly accelerators. They identify 510K quick to market, and that's fantastic. But again, one thing we always say to them, these are innovative products. How are you going to sell it at the end of the day? Who's going to buy it in the States if you go there too quickly without clinical evidence? And I think that's a big thing. How do you get paid? Because their investors are going to ask this for them, and they will not thank them if, the product's approved, but they can't make any traction on the market. What we would advise clients though as well here, look at the, if you have a 510K product, look at the 510K requirements versus the technical file requirements. A lot of similarities. Yes, MDR need to have your full test reports and that, but a lot of similarities. You're going to get our clinical evidence as well at some stage. So why not tuck it in for both? Now again, it will delay you, but if done correctly, it can be a boost to your company if you plan early. I think that's the biggest thing. If you plan. And look, if you think you're just going to go US first and, we'll come back to Europe in 2 years' time, you're going to spend more money. Yeah, some of the standards might be there, but you're going to be spending more money waiting because I think, there will be a longer delay. I think 2023, 24 is going to be very interesting for notified bodies. All of the delayed, the up-classified products and all of those CE mark products that have been under MDD that have been delayed. I think it's going to be the real test for the notified bodies, not now. I think that's, Dallas is saying there a year and a half, we're seeing a year. I think it really will be a year and a half, 2 years. It's going to be very interesting.
Thanks, Kieran. And Paul, I know that a number of our very naive clients seem to put together Canada and the US together and think that if they go to Canada, then they will automatically get approval in the US and vice versa. Could you just talk through the key differences with medical device companies coming to Canada?
Yes, well, we're completely independent from a regulatory point of view from FDA. They whatever FDA does is nice to know, but it doesn't buy you anything in Canada. So you have to do our whole process from beginning to end. And some of the naive clients, the American clients and the European clients, they say, "Oh, it's FDA approved. Here's my clip from the FDA website showing my approval. So when can I get it? When can I start selling in Canada?" And then I send them out the guideline on how to do a medical device application, and they say, "Oh." So yeah, it's a completely separate. Both the medical device licensing process is harmonized in the sense that the general requirements for safety and efficacy and quality are generally harmonized. So if you're doing a ventilator for Canada or a ventilator for FDA, you're not going to have dramatic differences in data requirements. I just did a ventilator I alluded to earlier, and that was a great big massive, a full medical device license application. And it was a European, it was an Italian design actually, and it had a CE mark. But we couldn't just say, "Oh yeah, the Europeans have approved this," even though it was a COVID product and being fast tracked. The whole data package, safety, efficacy, clinical trials, all that had to go in.
Okay, thank you, Paul. So Marcelo, with regards to Brazil, I mean, if someone is coming and going through the process with Brazil, does that open any doors for other territories? Does it make applications easier for other territories?
No, we don't have any option. In fact, most of the world right now doesn't have any option. In the past 20 years, several countries would still accept things like the FDA approval or CE mark. But from what I know from most of the countries in the world now, they don't have even an option on that. So as Della said, Mexico has something, Saudi Arabia has something, but very limited number that you can just use external approvals to fast track something. The main point, for example, in Brazil, what right now with the emergency regulations, and they said that if you want to buy something from abroad, you could in principle, right? But if you want to buy something from abroad, they have to come from countries, specific countries, because they, as part of the MDRF and things like that, they just said, oh, well, we'll only accept the ones that are registered in these countries. But this, again, this is just for emergency buying, in fact, not for emergency put into the market. What you said, just as well, comment on what you said previously in your comment, I think I do understand the business need on going to markets, but I think most of the people that I talk to doesn't understand that it's not a good time from the regulatory standpoint to do decisions, because as you said, all of those things are usually temporary and then just can go out of the way totally over one day to the other. So I just talked to some of my colleagues here and some that are from some multinational manufacturers, and just say that, yeah, our CEOs are the same thing, because yeah, if you look at that, it's not a good, it's not reliable, you know, because regulations are put together and they are not reliable as a permanent regulation, and most of the time they just can be withdrawn with just a click. So not a good thing not a good way to do business decision with that.
I mean, I don't know about everyone else on the panel, but you know, I've noticed that, I mean, a lot of people, their heart is in the right place and they're desperate to support COVID in some way and be part of the solution. But some of my concern is that a lot of companies have switched their development to focus purely on COVID, and other aspects are suffering because of it. They've stopped innovating in other areas. And I don't know if Marcelo, have you seen that in Brazil yourself? That there's this switch of focus?
Yeah, I did. However, in Brazil, we have, I'm not sure if it happens on other countries also, but we have a different kind of problem in Brazil. We have companies which are not medical device companies to register devices because of the authorizations, the emergency regulations. So it's very curious, because most of the companies that do not deal with medical device, they have no idea what to do. Even if the emergency use thing. So on the other side, the manufacturers that deal medical devices, some of them change it to help with COVID, but most didn't do that because they didn't notice that it's not something that I can do. For example, there is one ventilator manufacturer. There was one of the biggest in Brazil, but it's still small compared to others. So they have to, due to the COVID and the need from the government, because they were more or less mandated, they had to multiply their production facility by 18. So really, they have to go really big, really quicker, with a lot of different companies together, which again, we're not medical device companies, but they are respectable companies that had to pass some of the requirements. But the thing is, most of the devices there are the manufacturers that are not from COVID, they didn't do anything. Most of them didn't want to go out because they knew this thing, that the regulations on the emergency regulations would be a problem. I know a lot of manufacturers and importers just imported a lot of things. In fact, we have a lot of trouble right now because there's a lot of COVID testing there going on. The use date has been coming and they are not being used yet. But the thing is, most of the the real manufacturers that know what they're doing, I'd say, they didn't go into that, oh, let's just try to do something, because they know that it's really not that easy as people think.
I think something that I do want to touch on, and I know we talked quite a lot about COVID, but it is impacting on everyone's lives, personally and business, and that is with regards to, most of us are remote working, so companies with their quality management systems that need to be audited, so the regulators are doing virtual audits, and I just wondered if Dallas, do you have experience, do you have knowledge of the US FDA doing remote audits, and how acceptable is that? And is it going to change for the future? Are we going to see more of this longer term anyway?
So they actually stopped completely for a number of months doing the audits, the on-site inspections. And I attended a webinar, I believe about a month ago, where they said that they were actually starting up again doing on-site inspections. So some things that have changed with FDA at least are there's obviously a lot more prior notice to those audits on site, versus previously they may just kind of show up at your doorstep on that day and say, ready, go, we're here for your periodic inspection. However, with the COVID, so I've been hearing a lot more stories of FDA, giving, 2 weeks notice, with making sure that everyone there is going to be able to do a socially distanced audit, and everyone will have masks on, and only the essential personnel that are absolutely needed are there. So the FDA has actually started doing on-site inspections again, and I believe a lot of that is based on the risk of the devices that are being sold in the market. They have a triaging system where higher risk, class 3 devices obviously are getting audited more than lower class devices. So I'd imagine overall there's less audit activity going on.
Yeah.
I have not been aware of them doing 100% remote audits.
Yeah.
But I knew they shut down for a while. And then
there's a pilot on the FDA part, in fact.
Okay, so they're piloting remote audits. But yeah, I was not aware of across the board remote auditing program that they're doing.
Okay.
So
Paul, is there much in the way of remote auditing at the moment, and will that carry on? Do you know?
Yes, it's Health Canada is doing 100% remote auditing.
Okay.
My clients have, like for their medical device establishment licenses, we've probably gotten about 10 new establishment licenses. And within a week or two after the license is granted, they do the inspection. And they phone you up and they say, tomorrow we're going to have a Zoom call at noon, and this will be your inspection, and we're going to talk about all these different things. So it's not something, it's something, and they're just checking that you've got your quality system in place. So you would have to share documents to show you've got a recall program, a recall SOP, that you've got a complaint handling SOP. They would ask questions like that. So it's a half a glass full, but people aren't, they're being inspected.
Okay.
And on top of that, I'm a qualified person in Canada. So what I've been doing in the last 2 weeks, I have done 6 days of remote auditing in this format by Zoom. They were 3 2-day audits, 2 of them in Minnesota, and 1 of them in the south of France.
And that's why I couldn't get hold of you.
Yes, I've been quite busy. And so we've been doing these. And so one of the things we have harmonized with Europe is that a Canadian qualified person who signs a report about a facility can be accepted by a European qualified person, and vice versa. And so therefore the Americans call me up and say, I don't want to pay for the qualified person to fly them in from Budapest or wherever they're coming from. So we'll get Paul to do it. He's an hour away, because I'm in Toronto, and I'm about an hour from everywhere in the States by air. So.
Great. That's a really good arrangement. Kieran, would you like to comment on what's happening in Europe?
Yeah, I think it's more of a mixed bag as usual, really, in Europe. We've heard from some folks At the moment, Ireland has just opened up our travel restrictions. We in Ireland, our travel restrictions came in end of October, and they've only just been released last week. So we're really a week into able to travel around somewhat. But I know in Ireland that there's still remote audits going on. In Ireland, say we can travel from county to county. It's the same in the UK. For some areas are tier 3, tier 2, tier 1. And I know a number of remote audits have taken place. I have heard only a handful of on-site audits, more in the UK, and across Europe it's mainly focused on remote audits. And again, it's not a huge issue. I think if most companies are, pragmatic about it, they have the setup, they have the systems. Notified bodies have been pushing anyways for quicker amounts of documentation. They don't want all those documents printed. Some of them do. Some people still prefer paper. But having the documentation there quickly, so the systems have put in place for you have previously last year you'd have 3 auditors on site getting the documentation from the back room there very quickly for them. All that technology is been put to use for those remote audits, so they can say, right, is this document here or there? I think the main issue though has been around the production areas. Again, this isn't for the MDR audits, but again, this is your ISO 13485, and as long as a train member has a camera and can be directed by the auditors, that has been acceptable. But I think the main issue really is around the MDR audits, and I know MedTech Europe has been pushing really for a lot of support in that to make the remote audits viable. It's still a bone of contention, and it is something that's holding up a lot of companies with their MDR certification. But I suppose really watch this space as the pandemic goes on. And I'll finish up. Europe is going into lockdown just as Ireland's coming out. It's going to be tricky, especially if you have maybe a European notified body in a different country. Travel restrictions are, and lack of flights. That's a big issue.
Thanks, Kieran. So I'm conscious of time. We just got a few minutes left. So I'm going to put each of you slightly on the spot because I'd like you to pitch for why companies should actually come to your country and go through your process to get their medical devices approved. So Marcelo, Brazil, why should I come to Brazil?
Mainly, the main selling point for Brazil is that most of the markets that we have right now, such as the US and Europe, are already crowded in some areas. And one of the things that people like in Brazil is that there's a lot of potential yet. And also because Brazil, and I think this is important because of the COVID. I think my opinion and some colleagues is that some manufacturers in the past, they used Brazil as a hub in Latin America. They stopped it a little, but I think it's going to be needed again. So due to the COVID and to the changes in regulation and expectations for each country, because I think each country, you need to have more controls and more things related to their country. So in the case of Latin America in particular, I think Brazil will have to be used again as a hub for all Latin America, besides the Brazilian market itself.
Thank you, Marcelo. So Dallas, your pitch for the US.
Absolutely. Come to the US. Our process is now quicker than Europe.
Thank you.
However, obviously it is somewhat saturated. So the process though is well established. The pathways are pretty well established. It's a mature market with a mature regulatory agency that has mostly clear steps of how to get through things, unless they decide to change something, which they can do at any time if they want to. But we have a lot of the regulatory tools in the toolbox in place with FDA, different mechanisms, things all the way from a pre-submission or a Q-submission, which is a very early stage type of a submission where you can get some feedback from the agency in order to kind of direct your research and development activities. And so come to the US.
Thank you very much. So Paul, Canada, why am I coming to Canada?
I don't know. We're pretty saturated ourselves. I don't see any shortages of anything. So I don't know if there's all that much money. I think all the money's been made now. So I don't think we need anything. So thanks.
All right, bye. We'll leave you to yourself then. And Kieran, your pitch for Europe.
Well, I think at 500,000 or 500 million people, I think it's a pretty large market. Once you're, approved in Europe, you've access to the entire Eurozone and a few extra countries on top of that. Aging population, very good for healthcare and, very good from a marketing point of view. And look, it's one of the largest trading blocks in the world. And I think, Brexit aside, can't get away from that point of view. But again, for the next 2 years until June 30th, 2023, if you have a CE mark, a valid CE mark, you can place your product on the UK market. What's going to happen in the UK after that? Who knows? I'm sure the MHRA have a very good plan, just not allowed to say what yet. Brexit negotiations are going on, but look, Europe is open for business and a very large market.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to stand up for the UK in that, okay, there was an expectation that the UK was going to follow the EU medical device and IVD regulations. And then it was announced that actually we're going to stick with the directives. So we're going to stick to them for a few years. And which means that it's not going to be quite so onerous, the regulatory requirements, but that could all change in 2023. So when UK decides to have its own regulations or directives. But we do have the NHS, our wonderful NHS, and so there are opportunities still in the UK. Okay, a much smaller market because it's only one country and not the whole of Europe. But that's my pitch for the UK. So my thanks to everybody for joining in and sharing your knowledge and experience. Obviously people who, oh, sorry, Paul, did you want to say?
Yeah, I have a question about Brexit. Is it like, are you out on January 1st?
Well, we're out now, but we're transitioning out. But as from the 1st of January, yes, we will have left Europe.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So the chatter we're getting is that you want to have a free trade agreement with Canada, and it would be very likely that I think that could be done in a week. But,
okay, there you go. The pitch for Canada in the UK.
Will it be overrated?
Seems easier to do with Canada than with Europe, right?
Well, Canada has a free trade agreement with Europe now. And that's why, and we also have harmonization like of the QP regulation. So if you're QP in Canada or QP in Europe, you're recognized.
Yeah.
So to put that same thing in place with the UK, I think would just, I don't think that would take any time at all.
Excellent. Well, I hope the politicians are listening. Thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. And I'm sure that people who are going to watch and listen to this recording will learn a lot. Of course, they can reach out to you through the Genesis app. And I'm sure you're on LinkedIn as well if they want to connect with you. So Tony, thank you very much for having this time to have a chat.
Well, thank you, Greer, and to the whole panel. Thanks for being so open and frank about what's worked and what hasn't worked. It's clear the pandemic has put every regulatory system under immense strain. And some have adapted in different ways, and it's been fascinating to hear how they've adapted, what that means potentially for companies as they're looking at international markets. And I guess we'll wait and see what the legacy to some of that change is, as well as all the other changing regulations that they keep throwing down the track. And of course, Brexit. And maybe next year we'll be discussing what it's like to be outside of the EU. But with that, from me, Tony Jones of One Nucleus and the rest of my team, thank you for taking the time, and I'm sure the Genesis delegates will learn a lot from your insights. So thank you very much.
Thank you.